Hey there, this is John from Heroes and Legends, and welcome to part 3 of our Oath of the Gatewatch set review. So a couple days ago we looked at all the white cards, yesterday we looked at all the blue, today we'll be looking at the black cards and a couple of multicolor cards, and we'll be back tomorrow with green and so on. So if you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, definitely a good time to do so. We'll be working our way through the full set review, and then on Thursday we'll also do a pre-release primer, hopefully get you prepared for that pre-release next weekend. So having said that, let's jump into the cards. First one is Bearer of Silence, and just as a side note, you're going to see a strong synergy between colorless and black in this set. It does a couple things. First off, there is some synergy between black and blue that you'll notice, and there's also some synergy between black and just plain colorless cards and blue and just plain colorless cards. So the three of them actually go very well together. In addition to that, black and red still has a lot of aggro synergies together, just like they did back in Battle for Zendikar. And don't forget, Battle for Zendikar cards are also relevant in this limited environment. So things like the black-white ally deck, even though there's just a few cards that maybe complement those, are still very playable. So having said that, let's look at our first card, Bearer of Silence. This is a very good aggro card, and it's going to go very well in that black-red aggro limited deck. So 2-1, you get a flyer. It can't block. It's meant to be aggressive, but it's a very cool card because it has another interesting effect. You can pay 2 mana. Now, one has to be dedicated colorless, and then target opponent will sacrifice a creature. That's perfect for an aggressive deck, because basically you want to get a bunch of small creatures out, just start attacking in. When your opponent finally does play something, you just drop this on them, and they have to sacrifice it. That could be backbreaking. So this is a very good card. It's rare. You're not going to see tons of it running around in limited, but when you get it at the right time, it's going to feel really good. As far as standard goes, it's strong enough. I could see some standard play here if there is a strong aggressive deck, maybe a black-red aggressive deck that emerges in the metagame. This could definitely be part of it. Corpse Churn. I like this card. It's pretty economical, only costs 2. I probably wouldn't play this unless I already have a creature in the graveyard. You just wouldn't want to mill yourself 3 and kind of whiff with this. However, this is a card that gets better when Shadows over Innistrad comes out. I really think there's going to be some graveyard shenanigans. There's actually already a few cards, and we'll see a big one coming up soon here that plays with the graveyard, but that will become even bigger this spring with the Innistrad block. So keep an eye on this one. This card could actually become better. Right now, I think it's a fine limited card for some card advantage. Next is Drana's Chosen, and this is one of the cohort cards. I said in the last couple set reviews that cohort sometimes seems great. Some of the cards are really pushed. Others seem a little underwhelming. This one feels a little underwhelming to me. I just don't like paying 4 for a 2/2, and I would play this in limited if I was really going deep with the ally cohort, maybe rally mechanics. In that case, if I had that and it was running through black, I would probably still run this, don't get me wrong. And if I'm playing maybe black-white vampire allies, this is probably a pretty decent card to run in most cases, as long as I don't have better things to do at my 4-drop spot. But having said that, it just feels like a lot to ask to tap this another ally to get a 2/2 creature that's coming into play tapped. But this is another card that feels like it could be a lot better after Shadows over Innistrad comes out. I do feel like there's going to be some sort of zombie synergy theme going on in that next set, and there's a lot of zombie cards already sort of implanting themselves in this set, so it'll be interesting to see what comes from the next block. Dread Defiler, and I alluded to this one a few moments ago. It's a little expensive at 7. It's going to be at the top end of your limited curve, but you get a 6/8 body, which is okay, but that ability is what kind of sets it aside. You get to basically exile creature cards from your graveyard and just fling damage at your opponent. That's actually kind of awesome. So you can just be in a situation where maybe you mill yourself and you get some big creatures in your graveyard, or you played a big Eldrazi and it was destroyed and didn't really get to get in there for damage. Well, now you get a second chance. As long as you have colorless mana to spend, you can basically do some direct damage. It's actually kind of awesome. As far as standard goes, it's a very expensive card. There are a lot of ramp strategies, though, that are starting to come out in standard. So I'm not going to say 100% this is too much to spend in standard. Someone may brew and find a way to make this productive, so keep an eye on it. It'd be tough, but I wouldn't completely be shocked if it got there. Next is Essence Depleier, and this one is another card that really plays well with colorless. It really encourages you to have a black colorless deck. It's a 2/3 for 3, so the body's okay for limited, but if you have some colorless mana to spend, this is kind of a beating over time. It just sort of keeps just digging at your opponent, gaining you life, plays really well with the black-white vampire deck as well. Even if you just get one trigger every once in a while, you could get some other very beneficial triggers off your vampire allies. So this is a very cool card for limited. I don't really think it will get there in standard. I think it's just going to be a little too slow for what you're trying to do, but really strong limited card. Flaying Tendrils. Now this is a board sweep for small creatures, and these are always very good. Sometimes this might be a sideboard card in limited, and you'll just side it in if your opponent's being really aggressive, trying to get in there quickly with a lot of small creatures, and it will do you very well. And I think this could also be a sideboard card in standard. The only thing that's a little awkward is Languish is still a thing in standard, so once we do lose some of the big creatures, the Siege Rhinos and the Tassigers, once they rotate out, I think people may go to Languish before they go to this, but at some point Languish will also rotate out, so maybe the card will shine a little more at that point. But keep an eye on this. This will still see some play, but if zombie tokens really do become a thing in Innistrad, this card also becomes better to defend against it. Next is Grasp of Darkness, and this is actually a reprint. It saw play back in the day, and it will see play again today, I have no doubt. 2 black to do -4/-4 to a creature at instant speed is actually really good. This will be very strong for you in limited, and it's strong enough that it potentially could see some standard play. Again, it might be post-rotation because it can't deal with Siege Rhino, it can't deal with Tasker, but it does deal with a lot of stuff. Havoc Sower. So this is a pump creature. It's got fine stats for limited. Paying 4 for a 3/3 is okay, and if you have that colorless mana to pump into it, this becomes a very dangerous, aggressive creature. Pumping it just 2 mana for +2/+1 can become very good, and it leaves your opponent guessing when you attack in with this. Are you going to pump it? Or are you not going to pump it? Is there another spell you'd rather play? But your opponent just has to kind of play it safe and either chump block at times or just take some extra damage. So these cards can really do a lot of work in limited. Next is Inverter of Truth, and this is a mythic and definitely feels mythic. It has a big effect. It's very unique. It's a big 6/6 flyer for 4. Now you probably don't want to play this on turn 4 because you probably don't have enough stuff in your graveyard to really last long, and if your opponent finds a way to get rid of this, you could be in a lot of trouble. But where this card for me really shines is in the late game in limited. You get to the point where you could definitely use a 6/6 flyer and it will get in there for some damage, but also you'll probably have a lot of cards, or a fair amount of cards in your graveyard, and they'll be mostly spells and probably not a whole lot of lands. So you're basically going to get a chance to exile your library face down so your opponent can't see it for future matches, and there's a good chance your library will have a good amount of land still left in it, and you'll get this graveyard will become your new library, and you're going to probably get nothing but heat. That's actually kind of awesome. So I could see this being really strong in the late game of limited. As far as constructed goes, I think it's a little too volatile for standard. There probably is some way to abuse this in Vintage or Legacy. It feels a lot like Doomsday in Vintage, but then I gotta ask myself, is there any reason I'd play this instead of playing Doomsday in a Vintage deck? So I don't know. Someone may be able to brew this and figure it out. It can definitely work with cards like Laboratory Maniac, stuff like that, but keep an eye on it. It could do some stuff. Someone may be able to brew something in an Eternal format. Kalitas, a Trader of Get. This is actually a very good limited card, 3/4 with lifelink for 4. And I think this is another card that gets better once the Innistrad block comes out. It's doing a lot of things, obviously, with zombies and vampires. It's giving you zombie tokens. That seems like that might be a thing in the future. And also just being able to get some additional counters by sacrificing other zombies and vampires. Seems like it has some potential. So I don't really know if it's going to get there quite yet in Standard, but keep an eye on this one in the future. Kozilek's Shrieker. This is a fine limited card. Don't think it will go beyond that, but you're getting a 3/2 body for 3, and if you have the colorless mana to pump into it, it pumps, which is nice, and it gets menace on the first pump, so it gets a little bit of quasi-invasion. So yeah, I could definitely see myself playing this in a black colorless or black-red aggressive build in limited. Next is Kozilek's Translator. The sole purpose, I think, of this card is really in limited to get another source to get some of the colorless mana. There's a lot of really degenerate things you can do with colorless mana, especially if you're playing black or blue, and this is just another source of that. If you need a source, you'll play this in your deck. You may have better ways of getting it, and if you have better ways of getting it, then you probably won't play this in your deck. It's a 3/5 body, so that's not the worst thing in the world in limited, but it does cost you 5, and you're paying a life to get the colorless mana, and you can only do it once per turn. So there's a lot of limits to this card. There's probably better 5-drops out there for you, but like I said, if you need it, you'll be happy it's there. Next is Malachor Soothsayer, and this is a 4/4 for 5, and it has Cohort. Now this is a Cohort I can get behind. This one's a little more pushed, and I feel like this is one I would like to play in the right limited deck. So if I have allies, maybe I'm playing the Vampire Ally deck, and it's cutting into black, then yeah, I'm going to go ahead and use this. I'm more than happy to tap this and an ally to draw a card, even if I am losing a life. It's a very powerful effect, and that can add up over time and give you some great advantage. So, might not always work out for you because you do need the other ally to tap, but even if you don't have that, it's still a 4/4 body. You can still do a little bit of work on the battlefield, so more than happy to play this in limited. Think it's a little too clunky for standard, but definitely good limited card. Null Caller. This is an okay limited card, and you get a 2/4 body. I wish it cost less than 4 to convert one of your creatures in the graveyard into a zombie, so, especially since it comes into play tapped. It just seems a little expensive to me, so probably not always making my cut. Again, keep an eye on this card for the future. It definitely feels like they're setting up some sort of zombie matter synergy. Oblivion Strike. Now this is a very good removal card for limited. Only costs 4. Now it is sorcery speed, so yeah, it'd be better if it's instant, but 4 is still pretty cheap. Get to exile target creature. Being the fact that it's a sorcery and not an instant won't make it a premium piece of removal for standard, but it's still pretty cheap. It might make a little bit of an impact in standard if there aren't any better choices out there. So keep an eye on it there, but it's definitely great limited removal. Reaver Drone. It's a 1-drop, and we know that 1-drops are very relevant for surge activation, so if you're playing black-blue especially, or black-red, black plays very well with both those colors in a lot of different ways, in the aggro purposes as well as things like this, cheap casting cost creatures. Now this particular creature, it's a fine beater. It's a 2/1. It's basically a Savannah Lion with a drawback. If I have a lot of surge spells in my deck, yeah, I'd be probably a little more excited to play this. So it's not always going to make my cut though. If I'm being super aggressive or I have some surge, that's the deck I want it in. Other builds, I may leave it in the sideboard. Remorseless Punishment. So cards that let your opponent choose the outcome are never as good as you want them to be. Basically, you're paying 5 for this, and you're letting your opponent kind of choose what happens, and you know, obviously, they're going to choose the thing that's going to give you the least amount of value that will be the best for them. Now, granted, their choices are all sort of punishing, but they're just going to choose the thing that's the least punishing. Having said that, I think it's still decent enough to play a 1-of in a limited deck, as long as I don't have other 5-drops that are better. But it's not always going to make my cut in limited. It's definitely not something I want to play in a constructed format. It's just a little too inconsistent. Sifter of Skulls, and this is another just kind of value card for limited. You get a 4/3 body for 4, and if any non-token creature dies, you get a Scion token. Kind of nice for a little bit of ramp maybe, especially if you're playing like green black, which has a lot of synergies in the previous set, but at the same time you still get a decent sized creature for your trouble in limited. Scourer. This one I'm not as excited about as a limited creature. Now it only costs 2, which might work well if you have some surge in your deck or something like that, but just the fact it's a 1/2 flyer, it's not really doing a whole lot. I mean, sometimes it will be a 2/2, and that's okay, but not always. In a lot of cases, it probably won't make my cut unless I really want a 2-drop. Slaughter Drone. This is a grizzly bear, and you can pay colorless mana to give it death touch. What's not to like? This is actually pretty cool. Now, it becomes much better, obviously, if you have the colorless mana to spend. If you don't think you can consistently get colorless mana, this might be something that doesn't make your cut. But if you feel like a good percentage of the time you can give this thing death touch, this will be very good for you in limited. Tar Snare, another good limited card. It's going to go ahead and remove anything with toughness that's 2 or less and get in there and do a little work for you. It also works well as a combat trick. If you're trying to get rid of a creature that's a little bigger, you can block and then hopefully use this to destroy the creature and save your creature. So very good combat trick if you're looking for one in limited. Unnarural Endurance. I like these type of cards. They don't always make my cut. It just kind of depends on what else I have going on in my deck, but I like to be able to kind of surprise, regenerate a creature and protect it, or use this as a combat trick and regenerate. It's also a 1 casting cost spell, which again is very relevant for some Surge hijinks. Untamed Hunger. I'm not a huge fan of enchantments that don't either cantrip or replace themselves in some way, so this one isn't very exciting to me. It gets Menace, that's cool, but just the fact that it's very easy to get 2 for 1 makes me feel like I probably would very rarely play this. The only exception would be in limited. I might side this in if I felt like my opponent didn't have a lot of removal, then it becomes a lot more valuable. Other than that, I'm probably leaving it in my sideboard. Vampire Envoy. This one's actually kind of interesting design. I like this. It's a big blocker in the air, 1/4 for 3, but whenever it becomes tapped, you gain a life. It plays really well with Cohort and the vampire ally mechanics from Battle for Zendikar, where whenever you gain life you get some sort of trigger. So that's really what this card's for, and I really think the design is very eloquent combining those 2 pieces. Having said that, there's probably not a whole lot of use for it other than if you're building that deck in limited, but when you're building that deck, it's going to be a real cool tool. Visions of Brutality. Now this feels like a white card to me in some ways, but it also has some black attributes. It's very cheap. You can put it on your opponent's big creature like their Eldrazi, and then you can hopefully keep getting in there for damage and put them in an awkward spot that if they attack and you block especially, they're going to be taking a lot of unnecessary damage. So it can be kind of punishing against, say, a ramp deck that's trying to ramp into 1 or 2 really big targets. So I would certainly be more than happy to play this in limited. I think it's a very fine card. One thing to keep in mind though, if your opponent does attack you with a creature and it has this on it, you're going to take the damage before the piece of the card that damages them triggers. So if you get to 0 life, the trigger never happens, you actually lose the game. So keep that in mind. It's a little bit of an awkward interaction. Witness the Dead. This card's fine in limited. These type of cards don't always make my build. I much prefer these when they cost 3 mana instead of 4, but I get it. They're also adding the 2 life loss onto it, so that's why you're paying the extra mana, and that's okay. Sometimes you'll use this if you're playing a slower, more controlling build. If you're playing a faster, more aggro build, it probably won't make your cut in limited, but it's a decent card. It's not bad. Zealoport Chain Mage. This is a cohort card that I kind of like as well. It's not always going to be great for you, but when it does work, it's going to work great. If you're in some sort of board stall, it's going to be awesome. And you know, it's worth the risk. It only costs 4, and if it doesn't work out for you, it's still a 4/2. It's probably still going to trade for something. So I don't mind playing this one in limited. Now let's move on to a couple of the multicolor cards. This is the lone Golgari card in the set. It's Beloth Null, and yeah, it's a limited card. It's not much more than that, but it's not a bad one. You get a 4/5 body, and you also get to hopefully take 2 of your creatures from the graveyard back to your hand. It's card advantage. You get a little bit of board presence. Yeah, I wouldn't mind playing this if I was in those colors. And finally, the last card of the day is the lone Rakdos card in the set. It's Flayer Drone, and this is a very aggressive card. This is very pushed. You pay 3, you get a 3/1 with first strike, and early in the game you just get in there for damage, and just get in there and get in there and get in there. And then once your opponent plays something bigger that can block this, well then you just let it sit on the board, play some more colorless creatures, maybe get some Eldrazi Scions into play and get some of those triggers, and your opponent's still taking damage from this thing. I really like this a lot. I think this is a hugely pushed aggressive card for that black-red archetype in limited, and it's good enough to see standard play as long as that aggressive black-red deck shows up in the metagame. If it's there, this will definitely be a part of it. I really like this a lot. I think this is a very, very strong card. Keep an eye on this one. Well, having said that, those are the black cards for Oath of the Gatewatch. So we'll be back tomorrow to take a look at all the red cards in the set, and we'll continue on from there. So as always, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and have a great day.
Hey, thanks as always for watching. This video, like all my videos, was made possible by the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Even a donation of $1 helps me to keep growing this community and creating better quality videos for all of you. Check out our Patreon page for exclusive giveaways and future goals for the channel. If you haven't had a chance yet to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the MTG news, spoilers, set reviews, product openings, or finance videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a good day.